The Forgiveness of Monsters. Operation Paperclip. Chapter 1. The American Illusion. July 20th, 1969. Hundreds of millions of people gather around their televisions to watch grainy black and white footage of Neil Armstrong stepping onto the surface of the moon. It is the ultimate story of human triumph. It is the ultimate victory of American ingenuity, democracy, and freedom. The United States had beaten the Soviet Union. The good guys won. That is the story you were told in school. It is the story sold in history books, Hollywood movies, and national museums. But it is a lie, a carefully constructed, highly classified, multi-million-dollar public relations lie. The space race was not won by American heroes. It was won by men who, just a few years earlier, were wearing the swastika. It was won by high-ranking officers of the SS, designers of weapons of mass destruction, and men who oversaw the torture and death of thousands in concentration camps. You see, justice is not blind, and history is not written by the righteous. History is written by the pragmatic. When a monster has a blueprint that you desperately need, the government doesn't put them on trial. They give them a new name, a corner office, and a security clearance. Let's open the file on the darkest compromise in modern history. The operation that smuggled over 1,600 Nazi war criminals out of the ashes of Europe, erased their pasts, and handed them the keys to the American military-industrial complex. This is the true story of Operation Paperclip. And I'm your host. Welcome to the Influence Files. Chapter 2. The Ashes of the Third Reich. The year is 1945. Berlin is falling. The Third Reich is collapsing in a rain of artillery fire. Allied forces are pushing in from the west, and the Soviet Red Army is brutally marching in from the east. World War II is ending, but a new, colder war is already beginning. As American and British intelligence officers sweep through the ruined laboratories and hidden underground bunkers of Germany, they realize something utterly terrifying. The Allies might have won the war of brute force, but the Germans were decades ahead of them in science. They found the V-2 rockets, the world's first long-range guided ballistic missiles, machines that could drop explosives on London from the edge of space faster than the speed of sound. They found blueprints for jet fighters, chemical nerve agents that could wipe out entire cities in minutes, and terrifying advancements in aviation medicine. The American military realized that whichever country captured the men who built these weapons would dominate the next century. It became a frantic, desperate scavenger hunt. The Americans and the Soviets were no longer fighting the Germans. They were fighting each other to capture the smartest Nazis alive. But the United States had a massive public relations problem. How do you convince the American public, who just sacrificed hundreds of thousands of their sons to defeat Adolf Hitler, that their new top-secret scientists are the exact same men they were just shooting at? President Truman saw the moral dilemma. He officially approved a program to bring German scientists to the United States, but he gave a strict, undeniable written order. The military was absolutely forbidden from recruiting anyone who had been a member of the Nazi Party or who had been more than a nominal participant in its activities. No war criminals, no ardent Nazis. It was a noble command, and the United States intelligence agencies completely ignored it. Enter the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, or the JIOA. This was a newly formed faction of military intelligence. Their job was to vet the scientists. When the JIOA looked at the dossiers of the brilliant engineers they had captured, they realized Truman's order was a massive problem. Almost every single one of the top scientists was a committed, high-ranking member of the Nazi Party. Many were officers in the SS. Many were directly implicated in atrocities. Under the president's orders, they were supposed to be sent to Nuremberg to hang for war crimes. But the JIOA decided that American military supremacy was more important than justice. So, they ran a covert operation to bypass the President of the United States. When a JIOA officer found a brilliant scientist whose file was covered in Nazi affiliations and war crimes, they didn't reject him. Instead, the intelligence officers created a brand new, completely fake employment history. They physically took a standard metal paperclip, attached the newly forged, sanitized profile to the front of the scientist's file, and buried the evidence of their war crimes in the back. This simple physical act of clipping a fake profile over a bloody reality is what gave the program its name, Operation Paperclip. Through this massive fraud, the United States government smuggled over 1,600 Nazi scientists, engineers, and medical researchers onto American soil. They were given military escorts. They were given comfortable homes in Texas, New Mexico, and Alabama. They were given American citizenship. But to understand the true horror of this operation, you have to look at exactly who these men were. They were not just innocent academics caught up in a bad political system. They were the architects of human suffering. Let us look at the crown jewel of Operation Paperclip, Wernher von Braun. If you know anything about the Apollo missions, you know Wernher von Braun. He is celebrated as the visionary genius who designed the Saturn V rocket that took humanity to the moon. He is an American hero. What the history books gloss over is that Wernher von Braun was a major in the SS. He was a member of the Nazi Party. Before he was building rockets to go to the moon, he was building the V-2 rockets that rained fire and death down on the civilians of London and Antwerp. But the missiles themselves were not the darkest part of his legacy. It was how they were built. The V-2 rockets were manufactured in a secret underground facility called Mittelwerk. It was a literal hell on Earth. The workforce consisted entirely of slave labor pulled from the Buchenwald concentration camp. Prisoners were starved, beaten, and worked to death in freezing, lightless tunnels. They were hung from the cranes that were used to lift the rockets if they were suspected of sabotage. It is a historical fact that more human beings died building the V-2 rocket in those underground tunnels than were actually killed by the weapon exploding in combat. Wernher von Braun walked through those tunnels. He saw the slaves. He requested more of them when production fell behind. When the American military captured him, he wasn't put in handcuffs. He was put on a plane to America and eventually made the director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. And he was not alone. Take Arthur Rudolph. Rudolph was the operations director at the Mittelwerk slave labor facility. American investigators initially classified him as a 100% ardent Nazi who was considered a dangerous threat. Under Operation Paperclip, his file was whitewashed. He was brought to America, given top-secret clearance, and became the project manager for the Saturn V rocket program. He received the NASA Exceptional Service Medal. Or look at Hubertus Struckhold. In the United States, he was celebrated as the father of space medicine. For decades, the U.S. Air Force literally had an incredibly prestigious medical award named after him. What did he do during the war? He was the head of the Luftwaffe Institute for Aviation Medicine. His subordinates conducted unspeakable lethal medical experiments on the inmates of the Dachau concentration camp. To understand how pilots would survive crashing into the freezing ocean, they locked prisoners in vats of ice water and watched them slowly freeze to death, documenting their heart rates as they died. To understand high-altitude bailouts, they locked humans in pressure chambers and extracted the oxygen until their brains hemorrhaged. Struckhold claimed he didn't know the specifics of the human torture, despite being the head of the department and attending the medical conferences where the results of these murders were presented. The American intelligence agencies didn't care either way. They needed his data on how the human body reacts to extreme environments, so they could put an American in a spacesuit. So they gave him a paperclip, and they brought him to Texas. There was also Dr. Kurt Blom. Dr. Blom was a high-ranking Nazi scientist who directed the biological warfare program for Hitler. He tested weaponized diseases like bubonic plague and anthrax on prisoners in concentration camps. He was actually put on trial at Nuremberg, but he was mysteriously acquitted. Why? Because the United States Chemical Corps intervened. 2 months after his acquittal, they hired him to help the United States develop its own biological weapons program. Chapter 5. The Hollywood Whitewash. Once these men were in America, embedded deep within the military and the newly formed NASA, the government faced a new challenge. The Cold War was escalating. The space race was becoming the ultimate symbol of global superiority. The U.S. government needed the American public to fund these massive billion-dollar rocket programs, and they couldn't exactly parade a group of former SS officers in front of Congress to ask for tax dollars. So they launched one of the most successful psychological PR campaigns in history. They enlisted Hollywood. In the 1950s, Wernher von Braun was introduced to Walt Disney. Disney was building a massive new theme park called Disneyland, and he needed a scientific consultant for his Tomorrowland exhibits. The U.S. government saw the perfect opportunity. Wernher von Braun, the former SS major who utilized slave labor in underground death camps, became a television star. He appeared in multiple Walt Disney television specials, standing in front of models of spaceships, wearing a sharp suit, speaking with a charming accent, and explaining the future of space travel to millions of mesmerized American children. He was featured on the cover of Time magazine. He became the friendly, grandfatherly face of American science fiction. The PR campaign worked flawlessly. The American public fell in love with the vision of the future, completely blind to the blood soaked into the blueprints. The media didn't ask questions about middlework. They didn't ask about Buchenwald. They only asked about the moon. Chapter 6. The True Cost of the Future. Operation Paperclip remained a heavily guarded government secret for decades. It wasn't until the Freedom of Information Act forced the declassification of documents in the late 20th century that the terrifying scope of the program was finally revealed to the public. When you look at the modern world, you have to grapple with an incredibly uncomfortable truth. The foundation of our aerospace technology, our satellite communications, the GPS in your phone, and the pride of the American space program were all built on a foundation of unforgivable crimes. We look at history as a battle between good and evil, but the people running the world do not deal in good and evil. They deal in leverage. Operation Paperclip proves that the highest levels of government view morality as a luxury. If you are useless, you are held accountable. If you are a monster, but you possess knowledge that can build a better weapon or a faster rocket, your sins will be forgiven, your files will be redacted, and you will be given a medal. The next time you look up at the moon or see a rocket launching into orbit, remember the invisible men standing in the shadows of the launch pad. Remember the paperclips that hid their past. We conquered the stars, but we sold our soul to get there. I'm your host, and these are the Influence Files. Case closed.